Welcome, members. It's good to see you all again. Some I've seen for the first time, and some, for the reason that I will explain, wouldn't normally be here. There are a couple of things procedurally that I would like to bring to your attention before we start the meeting in full. We have had a question raised in relation to voting within the organisation, within this committee. As you're aware, as the independent chair, I do not have a voting right. So concern has been expressed in relation to the situation should there be a split and where any casting vote would take place. If that is the scenario, the casting vote goes to the Vice Chair, who is Councillor Flux. If we are in that scenario, I will leave the room until such time as that vote is concluded. Is that clear, or does anybody have any questions? Just that matter was raised by another member, and it's just for clarification. We have been joined today by two substitutes. Councillor Hardy, who is representing Councillor Towns, and Councillor Gallagher, who is representing Councillor Vilcek. So welcome to you both, and we hope that you find the meeting useful. Not necessarily enjoyable, but useful. Does anybody have any element of disclosure prior to the meeting commencing? Yeah. And do we have any apologies for absence, Leslie?
Yes, apologies from Councillors Towns and Wilczek, and from Karen Milner.
Thank you. If we could go on to the agenda fully. Item 4 are the minutes of the previous meeting.
Chair, sorry, this is just a note. Membership in terms of reference, number 2. And then it's disclosure of interest.
Sorry, I jumped the gun once again. I kind of take it for read that members are aware of the membership and the terms of reference that we have and the breakdown of the political parties in relation to the organisation. That is listed in the agenda as item number 2. And previously I mentioned item number 3, which was disclosures of interest. So again, another opportunity should you have a disclosure. Thank you, Neil. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes have been previously circulated. They are for a matter of information and record. There are no matters arising from them. But could I have agreement that they form a true record of the previous meeting? Councillor Sesson. Brilliant. If we move on to the meat of the agenda, which is the first part of 5, the appointment of parish council representatives, additional independent persons to the Standards Committee, and a note of the change of the interview panel. Neil, if I can ask you to start.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the purpose of this report is to ask members to ratify the appointment of Councillor Dunn to the interview panel with regards to the appointment of the 3 parish council representatives to the Standards Committee, and also the appointment of additional independent persons. There is a need to appoint parish council representatives to the Standards Committee following vacancies arising after the last election. And members will recall previously that they resolved that an interview panel be set up with delegated authority to make recommendation to council regarding the appointment of such parish council representatives. And at that stage it was agreed that yourself, Chair, and Councillors Flux and Wallace would form the interview panel. Since that date, due to changes in political proportionality, Councillor Wallace is no longer a member of the Standards Committee. And after consultation with yourself, Chair, it was proposed that the interview panel, that Councillor Wallace be replaced by Councillor done. And also, Chair, we also have an interview panel for the appointment of two additional independent persons that has previously been agreed at this committee, and it's proposed that Councillor Dunn also replace Councillor Wallace on the interview panel for that interview panel, and you will see that in your recommendations on page 7, Chair. And that is all, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. Do I have assent from the floor that we pass that particular resolution? Thank you, members. If I could go on to...
Chair, just for the record, could we have a formal mover and seconder for that?
Sorry. Yeah. Councillors Flux and Bridget.
Thank you, Chair.
If we move to the item agenda number 6, again, papers have been circulated. Obviously, this paper comes into being with a background of the Colour report and in relation to elements of reports on the 114 report. It is a complex scenario which may have a simple solution, we don't know, but I think it's probably worthwhile for me to introduce at this stage Samantha Broadfoot, who has been asked by myself and the appointed monitoring officer's representative to provide legal advice in relation to this matter. So first and foremost, I will ask Neil to present in relation to the report, but we will take reference to Samantha, and that information will be pertinent to your thoughts in this particular matter. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the purpose of the report is to place before the committee a preliminary issue in relation to 3 codes of conduct complaints, which is an issue for the committee to decide. There are 3 complaints under the Council's Code of Conduct that have been investigated and are now progressing to a local hearing in accordance with the usual procedure. In light of the Section 114 Local Government Finance Act report by the Chief Financial Officer and the report of Max Caller, the Caller report, both considered at the extraordinary meeting of the full council on the 8th of June, there is an issue about whether or not these complaints should continue to a local hearing or not. And Chair, there is a significant amount of detail within the body of the report which goes into detail about that matter, but I don't propose to go into all of that. Members have it before them and can read it. I'll just give a brief summary of the matters. So, Chair, normally such a decision would be made by the monitoring officer, but in view of the nature of the complaints and the context set out in the body of the report, the monitoring officer, through Mr Heath acting as monitoring officer, just to explain to members, the monitoring officer delegated her functions to Mr Heath in this regard, has decided to refer the decision to the committee. So should the committee decide to proceed, the next step will be for a full preliminary hearing to decide those matters that need determination before a local hearing itself can be held. If the committee decides not to proceed, then proceedings in respect of the 3 complaints end. However, Chair, I am aware that Ms Broadfoot is here to give advice on the contents of this report, and which will be pertinent to your decision, and so this is probably an appropriate moment to hand over.
Thanks, Neil. Yes, Samantha, if you'd like to take on from there, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Samantha Broadfoot, and I'm a barrister and Queen's Counsel down in London. I've been instructed by Mark Heath, who, as you've just heard, obviously was the external monitoring officer who wrote this report, and I've looked at it quite carefully, and the bottom line is I actually disagree with what he suggests is possible. And I'm going to tell you why in a minute, but I'm appointed as an independent legal advisor, and there's nothing more independent perhaps than actually disagreeing with what's been said. I'd like to make two preliminary points, though. First, I want to say that I entirely appreciate the thinking behind Mr. Heath's proposal. His report is careful and it is considered. I have read the Cala report and the Section 114 reports, which identify, as somebody not part of this council, considerable difficulties in governance that there have been for a while, and also that the Code of Conduct system has been misused by some at various points. And I understand that there is a desire to reset and for the council to move forward and resolve its various governance issues. And Mr. Heath's report very much is in the direction of travel to seek to progress that. My second preliminary point is this. These are difficult legal questions. There is no precedent that I have been able to find, and in many ways the council is in a rather unique position with the governance report that's happened and the whole overall context. So with those things in mind, let me tell you what my conclusions have been. The context are your local arrangements, and you're required to have local arrangements under the Localism Act. And those arrangements provide for several stages. And stage one is for the monitoring officer to receive a complaint and to decide whether or not it should go forward to investigations. That's stage one. That's obviously happened here. Stage two is for an investigation to happen, so for an investigating officer to be appointed and for there to be an investigation and a report. That has obviously happened in these three complaints as well. And stage three is where we're at. And that is the next steps by the monitoring officer. And if the report says there's no evidence of any potential breach and the monitoring officer is satisfied with that, then it's no further action. So that's one barrel that the report is put in, and that's not these cases. If the report concludes that there is evidence of a failure to comply with the code, then under the arrangements, the monitoring officer normally either seeks local resolution or sends it forward for a local hearing. Now, local resolution is not appropriate here for various reasons, so the question is local resolution. So that would be the normal route. But under the terms of your arrangements, the monitoring officer is given a discretion to not to refer a matter for local hearing if he is of the opinion of one of two things. Either that the nature of the failure to comply with the Code of Conduct does not justify the cost and time involved. So that might be where a complaint is trivial, for example. That's not the basis that you're being asked to exercise your discretion, so you can ignore that. Or for other reasons particular to the complaint. And that is what is in front of you. So what you're being asked to do is to find, or to consider anyway, are there reasons particular to these complaints which means that you should stop that process now? Now, Mr. Heath has set out in his report why he thinks that there are reasons that are particular to the complaint. And that is, as set out in the report, that the Cala report specifically says that there's been excessive and inappropriate use of the complaints procedure as part of the difficulties, the governance difficulties, the lack of trust that's happened in this council in the past. And he says, look, and it's set out very clearly in his report, that Cala identifies, that there have been inappropriate complaints by senior officers against members. And these are, you've been told, complaints by senior officers against members, and you're told that there's been this inappropriate use of the Code of Conduct, and those are sufficient reasons particular to the complaint for you to take this decision. I don't agree with that analysis. I don't think that the reasons that you have been given are particular to the complaint. They are general reasons. They are general reasons that apply across the generality of complaints. There have been lots of complaints that have been inappropriate and a misuse of the complaints procedure. But the Cala report does not say that all complaints are a misuse or an inappropriate use. And so unless you know more about these complaints, my legal advice is that you can't actually exercise that discretion because you don't, in fact, have the necessary information. There is a second reason why I think you can't do it, and that is because normally, under the arrangements, this discretion would be exercised by the monitoring officer. Now, the monitoring officer will know exactly what is in the reports because the monitoring officer will have had to read the investigating officer's report before deciding what to do. And so normally when you delegate something back or you send something back, you stand in the shoes of the person in whom the discretion is vested. And so it seems to me that that is another reason why, in my opinion, to exercise this discretion, which we've called the paragraph 7.2 discretion, because that's what it is in the arrangements, actually would not be a lawful use of this power. And that means, obviously the decision is for the committee. No doubt you'll discuss it and the chair will have views as well. But that's my view. And then if I could just preempt one final point, which is this, that there's no shame in two lawyers disagreeing with each other. Just like, lawyers do it at the highest courts in the land, in the Supreme Court, and even then, sometimes the Supreme Court can't agree. Or, you might have two surgeons who have differing views about how best to proceed with a patient. And so I don't think there's any shame in there being a disagreement, but, my view is what would happen if you took this course and somebody challenged this decision by way of judicial review. In my view, the council would then lose. So, matter for the committee, and obviously I'll take any questions as you see fit.
Councillor Bridget.
Thank you. Am I required to stand at committee, or is it just full council? Right, okay. Firstly, thank you very much for that advice. Secondly, would you like a job? That's in 15 years here, that's probably the most concise, understandable legal speak that we've been given. It's been given to us in a way that we can grasp as well. So thank you very much. I've got a number of questions. I'm trying to phrase the questions because I don't want to prejudice anything. So I'm guessing you've seen the investigations that have been done.
No, I haven't looked at them on purpose.
Okay.
Because I do not know who has been complained against, what their political makeup is, or who did the complaining. So I don't know that. All I know about the facts of the complaints is what you have been told in paragraph, is it paragraph 10? Or perhaps it's, I can't remember. It's in this report. So no, I don't know the details because you were being asked to decide as a matter of principle without knowing anything else other than that was in here. So I took the same view.
So what you're saying, your legal advice is based on that the reason we're being asked to consider whether this goes to hearing, your legal advice is that the reasoning we're being given from the Cala report isn't justification enough for us to be really determining that here. It needs to go to automatic hearing, or
Sure, that's a fair point, and I'm sorry, I should have been clearer.
Yeah.
There are theoretically two possibilities open to the committee. The first is that you say, well, it's going to go to a local hearing. We're just going to send it to a local hearing because we can't exercise the discretion on the information that we have, which is not enough, according to Ms. Broadfoot's legal advice. That's option one. The second option is to say, well, we want to know what was in those investigation reports before we decide whether or not to exercise the discretion to put a stop to it. But in order to make that work, you would probably need to set up a subcommittee to see it all, to then make that decision so that you had a separate part of the committee that could then hear the local determination if that was then what happened. So that's why I say it's theoretical because, well, I mean, you may decide to do it. That's not a legal matter. That is a matter for you all. But it would involve a considerable duplication of work because you would have to look at, or somebody would have to look at it all, and then the people who look at it may still decide it's got to go to a local hearing.
Do you want a supplement?
I mean, I've got a number of... Yeah, sorry. The investigations have been carried out. And we don't know what's in those investigations. They've been carried out separately. And those investigations have concluded, I assume, they're done with. And that's why we're at this stage now. Who has seen the results of that investigation? So I'm assuming not democratic services, I'm assuming legal services or a select few in legal services. Who has seen those reports?
Yes, Chair, I can answer that. So it would be the monitoring officer together with deputy monitoring officers, because we received those investigation reports. The subject member and the complainant would have both seen those reports, but other than that, nobody else.
Do you want to follow that up?
I know you don't have it to hand, but it's the thing that's in the back of my mind, and it's not what is the cost of this so far if an independent investigator has been appointed? Do we know?
I don't have figures to hand, Chair. Sorry.
Is it something that we can supply?
I'll take that request away and see what. I'll obviously take it to the monitoring officer.
So, and I'm trying to think this through in my head. So the reports of the investigation's been shared with the monitoring officer, the deputy monitoring officer, the complainant, and the individual who it's about. So if we decide here today not to advance it to a local hearing, what's to stop the complainant then sharing the contents of that investigation? Because that's a worry for me, and I'll put a political hat on here. I don't know what's in the investigations. I've got no idea. But if we decide not to advance it, and as the QC that is here today has said, it could be grounds for judicial review. But if we decide not to advance it to the next stage, and then that report or those reports or whatever end up in the press, it's going to make I'll feel, having voted, say, to not send it to the next stage, and then eventually reading in the papers, I'm sure many of us will be asked the question, well, why didn't you? And then we've got to say, well, we didn't know what was in the reports.
Chair, I understand the question. It is difficult because it is straying away from the true question that's been presented in the report here. I don't want to get into... Obviously, until investigations get brought before Standards Committee at a hearing, they are conducted in a confidential manner, and that is expressed to all parties when they see the report. I'm not in a position now to give legal advice on confidentiality, but obviously the expectation is that those will be kept in a confidential matter. What individuals actually do, obviously nobody can stop people doing what they want to do in terms of divulging information, but I would certainly hope that wouldn't occur. But other than that, I can't really comment any more on it, Chair. I don't think we can cater for a situation that is hypothetical. You know, it might never actually happen.
I suspect it's unsatisfactory in that respect, but I think it's probably the best answer we can give you at this stage, Councillor. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just get some clarification, because I did think Samantha's bit before was really clear, but now that I've had a couple of minutes, I'm getting a bit blurred again. If it hadn't been for the Cala report, and we wouldn't presumably have been in this situation, and what would have happened to these 3 complaints then? How would they have, what would be the means of progressing them? And secondly, Samantha, just to get it clear in my head, are you saying you did not think that this committee had the authority to sort of come to this decision? In which case, where do we go?
Sure. In relation to your first question, which is what would have happened if we didn't have the Cala report, I've got to unpick that. So the power that this committee could have, or if it's sent back to it, or the monitoring officer has, not to send something for local resolution, for local hearing, is in the arrangements, right? So that power exists regardless of the Cala report. It might be exercised in different cases in different ways. So that power exists, so Cala doesn't make any difference to that. The issue is whether or not there are circumstances particular to these complaints. That's when you can exercise this power. And Mr. Heath's argument, and he is very experienced, is that there is sufficient information in the Cala report to say that the reasoning in the Cala report is particular to these complaints, and he and I differ on that. And I really, it's unhelpful to have 2 lawyers disagreeing, but there we are. And so, if it hadn't been for the Cala report, it's possible, I suppose, that the monitoring officer might have looked at the investigation reports and said, I'm still not going to let this go forward for reasons particular to the complaints that have nothing to do with Cala, but we just don't know. Sorry, do you want me to answer your second question, which was, I've now forgotten, sorry.
Where do we go?
Yeah, with your advice or your thoughts that the committee wasn't sort of authorised to come to this decision, the recommendation?
It's less about authorisation, and it's about whether or not you can properly take a decision to stop it using the power under Section 7.2 of the arrangements, and my advice is that you can't. And that means then you've got these 2 potential options. One is to say, right, we're going to defer the decision and we're going to set up a subcommittee, and they will then look at it again with all the information and then make a decision. Or the committee can say, there's no point in doing that. We're going to just send it for a local hearing.
Supplementary, Councillor, or are you okay with that? Councillor Dunn, are you okay with that? Can Councillor Reid, then Councillor Grimshaw, then Councillor Sessa?
Yeah, thanks. Everybody knows that I love to talk about how many angels are dancing on the heads of how many pins, so this is just right up my street. But I thought I was going to have trouble with this, but I don't at all. I mean, it's just got to go to the local hearings. It's got to go through the process. We can't be messing on with having subcommittees and all the rest of that. It doesn't matter what the Cala report says. We just need to send this to local investigation. And if I could have a seconder for that, I would move that we do that.
Can I get the questions first and then seek to move that again?
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, happy to.
Councillor Grimshaw.
Well, it's clear, but now we've got 2 conflicting barristers. It makes life a little bit more difficult to think, well, you would go A or B. But however, considering there's been an awful lot of money spent on this thus far, and officers are putting this into our care, I obviously think, you know, like Councillor Reid says, we need to decide today that it has to move forward. We've got no alternative. We're being seen as being upfront and honest. We've got the Cala report in front of us. A lot of members has agreed now in council from all, you know, areas of political persuasions that we move forward, be upfront, honest to our residents that we represent. And I think in doing so, we've got to move forward and get issues resolved as quickly as possible. And as Councillor Reid said, starting to have subcommittees, and then it's going to linger on, and then we don't know what's going to be released by the press or whatever, and it's just going to make matters worse to resolve. We're all working together. So I agree with Councillor Reid. And it's very difficult, and we totally understand, because we don't know the content of anything or who is involved. So it is very difficult. So therefore, I think it should be, you know, go to the next stage. I really do. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Grimshaw. Councillor Sesford.
Thank you very much. I find this whole situation slightly ridiculous, if you ask me, to be honest. I mean, we should be here to look at the evidence and determine an outcome from that evidence when it's passed to us. But at the moment, it's not being passed to us. It's, the monitoring officer has been failed to make a decision whether it should be proceed or not. And that's so therefore we're now in a situation where we've heard conflicting things of two barristers, one who appears to be using the Cala report to say it should be stopped, and yourself who says we can't do that, it should go ahead. So I don't think it should. I don't know even why it's come to this committee. It should have been decided by the monitoring officer, and we should be then looking at the evidence and making a decision on the evidence. So I think, to be honest, this is a completely ridiculous situation.
Thank you, Councillor Sesford. Coming back to Councillor Reid, you wish to make a motion? Yes, apologies for the bad time.
Can I move that we forward all three cases to the next stage of the process? And thank Samantha for her time and energy that she's doing this for us.
Do we have a seconder, Councillor Dunn? Is it likely that this is be a matter of assent rather than it being a close vote? Are most people in agreement with this as a motion? Can I have a show of hands, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's unanimous.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insight, Councillor, and for cutting through. On a personal basis, and these meetings aren't necessarily for personal basis, but Samantha did explain very carefully the difficulties involved in this particular matter. I worked closely with Mark in relation to the production of the report. We believe we were on firm ground. We were conscious of the issues in Cala. We were conscious of previous issues where members have been concerned when matters dealt with by the monitoring officer were seen not to have had the fullest of hearing. So we obviously wanted to try and get this into the biggest forum we could. So in that respect, and on the back of the information from Samantha, I can only apologise, Councillor Sesford in particular, for looking at that as a means of resolution, because that was what we genuinely believed was the best way forward. In hindsight, and having taken suitable legal advice, I think we've come to a good and logical conclusion, and I thank you for your considerations. So, any further comment?
Just to say that there may well be some of the issues in the complaints, we don't know, that are not like progressible because of Cala and because they've been dealt with previously, but until we get them, we can't deal with them. That's the...
I think that was always a fundamental issue. If you are unable to actually make a reasoned decision in relation to them, it was always going to be a difficult position to come to a proper conclusion. And I think Samantha has cleared that up very much. And as I say, we believe we are acting in the right fashion. We've been proven not to have done that correctly, myself and Mark, you stand up and you take that on the chin. I think ultimately we have got the right decision, and it's due largely to yourselves that that is the case. So again, thank you. Councillor Flux.
I basically was just going to make the fundamental point. We're sitting here and we don't know if we're deciding on something as trivial in legal terms, which could be a metro fine, or whether this is trial of the century. We don't know. And why we don't know that, I think there's only one decision we could make today, wasn't there, really?
I think you're correct. I think that's sound. Again, I thank you for your efforts in relation to that. I trust that that matter is now closed and we have resolution. Anybody, any further comments before I close this item? Sorry, there is another element of it. Obviously, if we seek to proceed, which we have done, we need to start looking at the date under which those hearings would take place. How do we just look at dates, Neil, or?
Actually, Chair, the second recommendation is to look, because some of these matters are complex, the proposal is to have a preliminary hearing, quite similar to what you have in a normal courtroom, where any issues that might affect the hearing can be ironed out and resolved before, so that they're not all done on the actual day of the hearing, which would obviously affect the timescale of the hearing. So it's for that preliminary hearing to set a date. I don't know how members wish to do that.
I suggest after the summer holidays. Yeah. So after September the 1st.
Do you want ourselves to create that date and advise?
Yeah.
You happy with that? Brilliant. Thanks very much. Councillor Sesford, I thought so. Yeah, raise your hand. Sorry. Thank you very much for your considerations in that matter. It is useful to have that that clarity, and obviously it's useful that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet when we get to these meetings. So thank you for that. If we could then go on to the next item, which is the item 7, Code of Conduct Complaints and the Progress Report. Neil, if I can hand to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual statistical report that we bring to the committee, just on numbers with very short amount of information relating to the complaints. As usual, Chair, there's nothing I can really say about them, apart from, I suppose, the obvious reflections would be this year, this calendar year, there is obviously a large number of complaints. As ever, there are some complaints from relating to the same subject matter, maybe, and from the same complainants. So there are, although it's not reflected in the statistics, some of them can be grouped together. So if they are resolved on group, should I say. But the table is before members, and it's just for your consideration, really, to be received.
Councillor Bridget.
Yeah, a couple of questions. The first one is there any way that in future we can actually see, obviously without identifying anyone, but how many of these complaints have come from the same person? Is there any way it can be broken down to because yeah, one of the things that the Cala report highlights, I can quote the section, is the amount of complaints from officers about members, and it highlights that there needs to be local resolution where possible, of which I hope there is, and I hope that is being looked at in light of the Cala report. But one of the things that I would like to understand better is how many of these are coming, and that includes whether the complaints about from officers, whether the complaints from parish councillors, or whether the complaints from other members. Is there any way that they can be grouped so you can see how many complaints are coming from one individual going forward without identifying the individual.
Neil?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that officers have considered whether sufficient enough information is coming before members. This is very much a table that's been in existence for a number of years. Officers have inherited. And I think very much it is left open to yourselves, to the Standards Committee, to determine the amount of information that is presented to you. Obviously, it has to be confidential. No personal details have to be in there. But certainly, I can take those comments away, and we can consider them within the team. And on the next occasion, we can within this a similar report as this, we can give our views on that. But there's certainly nothing that I would say prohibits us bringing more information along those lines to the committee.
Yeah, because one of the things the Cala report, it specifically mentions, I can't find the page, but it specifically mentions, for instance, the number of complaints from officers regarding members and how it has been excessively used, etc. So part of the reason is, can we group them to see how many complaints are coming from one individual? Or but I think because it looks like a lot, it looks like a huge amount, but if someone is using the complaints procedure in a habitual and potentially vexatious manner, is that something that we need to look at?
I think we do need to look at it. I think what Neil has described is a process whereby we will be reviewing a number of elements, the way in which we operate and the way in which we report. Would that be a fair summary, Neil?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Just again, a couple of points. Obviously, the vexation, if there is a vexatious element to any, that is something that is built into our current procedure anyway, so that will be considered by the monitoring officer. The statistics aren't really there to show that. But just secondly, on page 14, on the previous report, there is a breakdown of that sort of information about who the complaints were actually made by, and that was information that was sent to Mr. Cala. So that information in itself isn't fundamentally confidential.
No, what I'm saying is it says 8 complaints by officers against county councillors. What I'm saying is, though, is not that. What I would like to see is, obviously without identifying the officer, say, all of these complaints are from one officer, all of these complaints are from one councillor. That's what I'm getting at, because the Cala report identifies that the standards reporting, the code of conduct breaches, is potentially being used excessively. So let's get a broader, without wanting to prejudice anything and obviously not including any confidential information, let's get a broad idea of what actually, let's break it down and find out where it's coming from.
Okay, Chair, I understand the question, and we will go away and review that and report back to the committee.
Yeah, are you happy with that? Because we will be looking at it. The point is well made and taken, and we will build it into the reviews that are undertaken. Councillor Flux.
Similar line, really. If we're doing that for complainants, should we be doing that for people being complained against as well? So if there's a specific councillor, for example, who's getting an extraordinary amount of complaints against them, whether that's vexatious or political or what, that would be a piece of information I think would be useful as well. Because if it's just, frankly, if it's just 1 or 2 councillors complaining about 1 or 2 councillors, then we've got a whole huge bit of paper here, which is just possibly a few people playing games. My other concern, the only concern I have with what Councillor Bridget suggests, is what would happen going forward. Would we have lots of different complaints being made by proxy? And I'll be perfectly honest, I think whether there are complaints here, I think complaints are being made by proxy, by people having a word and getting someone else to put a complaint in, rather than themselves. Would that happen more if we had a situation where we had a running total of how many complaints one particular person was made. So I won't put a complaint in this time. I'll get Councillor Reid to put in next time. So because it won't tot up on my numbers. That's just a couple of thoughts.
I think it's a sensible approach and a thought. And again, I would suggest that we will be building into the thought process. And there are difficulties in how you tread through those particular processes, and I think we need to give it considerable thought. I have a question from Councillor Sesford, one from Councillor Grimshaw. Then I'm going to ask Sam to perhaps give us a little bit of a legal insight as to some elements of this. So, Councillor Sesford.
Thank you very much. I can't disagree with what Councillor Bridget said, having in the past more or less asked the same identical question. There's only certain people, when they deal with these cases and dismiss the case for irrelevance or vexatious reasons or something like that, and if these are treated as a standalone matter, as in put to one side and deal with the next case, you can understand that. However, a lot of them are dealt with by the same people, so they must see some form of pattern here. And so maybe, we can't take action because we don't know the people's names. We don't know the allegations. But what the people who are deciding, making these decisions to close these cases or to turn on isn't them, must have an overall view. They must see whether it's the same people in similar complaints. And so my question is, the monitoring officer, whoever it is that deal with these, they need to be sort of initiating something, if you like, and saying, we've had 7 weak cases, vexatious cases by the same person, and I think they need to have not necessarily action taken against them, but be spoken to and said, why are you doing this? Because if you just treat them as all standalone ones and say, yes, this person's put 7 in, well, there could have been very close cases. There could have been balance of opinion that's decided not to take this case forward. Or they could be blatantly vexatious. And so I do think that the people who carry out these investigations need to step up the game a little bit and sort of have an overall view of what's going on and whether or not they have spotted anything that's not quite appropriate.
Do you want to come back on that, Neil?
Just that I take on board Councillor Sesford's comments. Sorry, Councillor Sesford. Just that I take on board your comments and we'll discuss them within the team.
Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually not a question. It's just a comment. And I'm looking at this in a very optimistic way now because we want to move forward. And I'm hoping that in view we're all working together, we'll see very few complaints, either from officer to member or member to member or member to officer. So I'm looking in a positive way and hopefully that, what was on the right road to resolve a lot of these issues we've had in the past. So I'm being very, very optimistic. So hopefully there'll be very little to look, not to hear in future. Thanks, Chair.
Wholeheartedly endorse your concerns.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one other point as well, which really arises from Councillor Grimshaw's comments. Of course, full council has resolved to agree an action plan that went to the last full council, and there was an item on that the matters, code of conduct matters, which are at an initial stage, would all be reviewed with a view to local resolution if possible. So it's worth mentioning that today, members. I don't know when that will happen, but obviously it will be as soon as possible.
You happy with that, Councillor? Councillor Flux.
Just one tiny concern I have about this is that you could have a member, for example, who is being bullied mercifully, without mercy, and has had to put lots of complaints in because they're being bullied. I worry we'd get in a situation of victim blaming. The potential for victim blaming could occur if you said, oh, look, so-and-so, because we can read between the lines, has...
I'm not asking to identify any members.
I know you're not doing that.
I'm just wanting to know, I'm just wanting to get an idea Are these complaints from...
Can I please finish my
Sorry,
point?
sorry.
I just really am worried about that because I do feel that people hear stuff, people read between the lines, and people will infer what's going on. And I think there's lots of inferring goes on anyway, sadly, and tittle-tattle. But I do worry. It's just a concern of mine. I don't think it's an overriding concern because I think in general you're right. But I do have a little bit of concern that we could be in a situation where we get into victim blaming, and I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Simple as that.
Thanks for that, Councillor Flux. I think to try and assure the pair of you, I think we've tried to express that we will be reviewing a number of elements of how Code of Conduct goes forward in light of the Colour report and in light of a number of the comments that have been made here today. We are always going to unearth things that we've never thought about and maybe things that we pick up along the way. And that's the whole point of a reviewing process, so that we can actually start to talk to people, try and identify where those issues may be, where people have concerns, where people have anger, because that's got to be dealt with, because a lot of the decisions that people make come from anger. So there are a number of things that we need to build in to any review that we do. And at this stage, I think it's extremely difficult for Neil or myself to allay all of your fears at this stage. But what I can assure you of is that we will work extremely hard to try and pick up all of these pieces of information that you're bringing to the table, build them into the processes, look at them, review them, and look at the best way in which we can go forward in terms of dealing with complaints and the mechanisms that we might need to deal with bullying, which could be an entirely different thing rather than a complaints process. So there's a number of areas that we have to look at. So I trust that you will give us that opportunity. And I'm sure you will, because you are all fair-minded people. I'm going to offer an opportunity to Sam to give us a little bit of legal insight. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. The bottom line is that Neil and the Chair are both right. The desire for more granulated data, which is basically what you're seeking, is completely understandable for the reasons that you've expressed. But equally, from a legal perspective, it has to be made sure that it doesn't in any way prejudice the consideration of the individual complaints. And just because a person has made a complaint that was found to be unfounded before doesn't mean that the current one is. So there are. So Neil is entirely right to say, you know, he'll take that away and work out how to give you the data that the committee may want in order to look at if there's a systemic problem. You know, to see whether actually one needs to step back and say, well, actually, this isn't as bad as it looks, because in fact, a lot of these complaints arise out of one particular incident that blew up and caused a lot of upset. So yeah, from a legal perspective, yes, you have to be careful, but Neil said he'll look at it. So it's understandable why I can't give an answer straight away.
Anybody any further? Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Right, Neil, we all realise, because we deal with disputes of different types every day of our lives, the impact upon the both sides, if there's just two sides involved, the families and whatever. What's your situation now? Are you coping in your office with the complaints coming in? Because I expect the tapering off somewhat now. And there has been a huge backlog, and I raised this with previous monitoring officers, dealing with town council complaints, and they're going on for years. So what's the expectations? Have we got time limits for your work there? Have we as a council given you and your office sufficient resources to deal with that? There has been one or two distractions the last few months.
I'm going to give a really boring answer, Chair. Really, these are workforce questions. so obviously, I don't really want to. It's fair to say it's fair to say that you know, you've seen the number of complaints this year. You can compare that against the last 2 years, because the statistics we present to members of the committee are the years where there are still open complaints. So there's still 3 open complaints from 2020 and a few from 2021. So the numbers obviously have gone up this year. So there will be a correlation with how much time officers need to spend on them. But conversely, some complaints, although there may only be a few complaints, they could involve vast amounts of information. So it's a bit hard to judge that way. But obviously, if the numbers are going up, then that it involves officer time. But I mean, certainly, I think that there can be discussions on those issues, Chair, but probably outside the remit of this committee, because it brings into question resources, and that's not really what I can discuss at the moment.
That wasn't boring, Neil. But some of these complaints would be 2 minutes to glance at and think, whatever your decision is going to be, and the other ones might take a long time. So I think it's right to ask if we've got the resources here, because it's not fair to anybody.
Cleverly political answer for an officer. Thank you, Neil. I think I should also remind members that you yourselves are looking to try and assist and alleviate some of the issues in the fact that you're actually trying to bring in 2 more independent people, which are part of the process that we discussed in an earlier item agenda. And that should help in that particular process. It's not going to resolve all the problems, Councillor Stewart, I doubt it ever will, but I think it can only help. And, you know, it's your forethought and thinking in those terms that's going to help down that line. So, again, it's a package of measures. The stuff that Neil probably cannot discuss for very good reason that will be happening internally. And there's the elements that you are involved in yourselves, which is, you know, agreeing to have those additional independent members to assist in the reviewing of cases. So, does any other member have any any matter to rise in relation to this item? In which case I'll close that and thank you. Final matter is any matters of urgent business. I haven't had any tabled to me. Is there any from the floor? Any from officer side?
There's no urgent business.
No. Brilliant. Well, that being the case, thank you very much for your attendance, especially those who were called in as substitutes. Thank you for your time and your effort. Next meeting, the next scheduled meeting, should be the 13th of October, Thursday the 13th of October, 2022, and it will be in County Hall at 2 p.m. Councillor Reid, we will look at the a more suitable venue, perhaps, so we can not necessarily be cosy, but at least be a bit closer together, so that it doesn't look as if we're wrangling at distance. Well, it depends. It depends, but probably not. That being the case, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your attendance.